One of the best things about being a journalist is that you sometimes get to meet interesting people. And I have been truly fortunate in my newspaper career to interview fascinating figures such as Margaret Thatcher, Fidel Castro, and even Julia Child. But by far the most impressive person, the most unforgettable person that I have ever met is someone whose story you might not know. Her name is Aung San Suu Kyi. She won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1991. And I'd like to share with you this morning why her example is so important today. Aung San Suu Kyi won the Peace Prize for her brave efforts to bring democracy to the country of Burma, which was renamed Myanmar by the military generals who have ruled the country with an iron fist since the 1960s and reduced it to ruin while they became rich. In 1990, the military briefly allowed elections, and the generals were caught by surprise when Aung San Suu Kyi's pro-democracy party won more than 80% of the seats. Instead of letting Suu Kyi's party take office, the generals arrested most of the party leaders and placed Aung San Suu Kyi under armed guard in her home. She was kept a prisoner in her house for 15 of the next 20 years. But she would not give up. She could not let her people down. She knew that 4 out of 10 children were severely malnourished. She knew that Burma had become one of the poorest countries in the world, with a lower per capita income than the Sudan. She knew that Burma had become a narco state, one of the leading producers of heroin and methamphetamines in the world. So she could not give up. Whenever the military would allow her to leave her house, she would go back out and encourage the people to be brave, to be noble, to keep working for democracy. And when she did, the generals would lock her up again. Several times she had to sell her furnishings to get food, but she wouldn't let go. She sent word out from her house, tell the people not to be afraid. Her own life was constantly at risk. Paid thugs battered her supporters and smashed her car windows. Soldiers stopped her car on the road and barricaded her inside her car for days on end. Once she was trapped in her car for 9 days. But she went back out. During one campaign trip, soldiers tried to ambush Suu Kyi as she went to a remote village with a group of her supporters. As they rounded a corner in the road, they saw a group of soldiers waiting for them, their rifles aimed and ready to fire. As Suu Kyi's group walked forward, the countdown to fire began. 5, 4. Suu Kyi motioned to her followers to stand back while she walked forward alone. 3, 2. At the very last second, the commanding officer ordered his men to put down their guns. He couldn't allow them to shoot someone so brave. As a result, he was sent to prison. Suu Kyi continued to go back out to speak. To understand such courage, you have to know her family tree. Aung San Suu Kyi is the daughter of 2 remarkable people. Her father is considered the George Washington of Burma. He was a war hero who fought for independence from British rule. He was in the process of organizing a democratic government after World War II when he was assassinated, gunned down by political rivals. Suu Kyi was only 2 years old. She was brought up by her mother, Khin Kyi. Khin Kyi was a nurse who became a national leader in her own right, elected to parliament and named ambassador to India. She constantly coached her daughter to remember her father's sacrifice and to be dutiful. Suu Kyi was a good student and went to England to study at Oxford University, where she met and married a tall, sandy-haired British student named Michael Eris. He went on to become a respected professor at Oxford. Suu Kyi settled into university life as a faculty wife and mother of 2 sons, Alexander and Kim. She was known as a perfectionist mom in the neighborhood. She not only ironed her husband's shirts, she ironed his socks. That domestic scenario was suddenly interrupted in 1988. A call came one evening that Suu Kyi's mother had suffered a stroke and might not live. Aung San Suu Kyi immediately packed her bags. She arrived in Burma just as massive student demonstrations against military rule erupted across the country. As the protest grew, the military cracked down hard. More than 3,000, perhaps as many as 10,000 people, it was impossible to count, were killed in one day alone, August the 8th, 1988. Suu Kyi was at the hospital caring for her mother as the wounded and the dying were brought in, stretcher after stretcher. Some had been shot in the back, some between the eyes. Some were only children holding up photos of Suu Kyi's father when they were shot. The leaders of the democracy movement came to Aung San Suu Kyi and begged her to take up her father's dream of democracy. She must, they said. It was her duty. Aung San Suu Kyi listened carefully and said, "All right, let's go forward." Aung San Suu Kyi was 44 years old. She gave the first political speech in her life before 500,000 people at the revered Shwedagon Pagoda. She then campaigned for democracy across the country for month after month, thinking that she would be able to return to her family after she had helped her party win the election. She had no way of knowing then that she would be cut off from the rest of the world for nearly 2 decades. When she won the Nobel Prize, Aung San Suu Kyi was locked up in her house and happened to hear about it while she was listening to the news on the BBC. She was only allowed to visit her family a few times over the years. She was not even allowed to see her husband when he fell ill with prostate cancer in England. Michael Eris died at the age of 53 without seeing her again. Aung San Suu Kyi mourned alone, but she would not give up. She would not let go. As I read about her over the years, I thought, how does she go on? I decided to see for myself what made Aung San Suu Kyi tick and arranged to go to Burma and to schedule an interview in 2003. I had to operate a little bit under the radar because at that time no press visas were granted and you could be arrested for interviewing activists. In fact, people in Burma could be put in prison simply for talking about Aung San Suu Kyi in public, so they referred to her in whispers as the lady, the lady. I can't tell you how I got past the armed guards into her home, but I can tell you that I hid several small notebooks in my clothing and I wore pink. My theory was that the soldiers would never guess that a middle-aged lady in pink was a reporter. And it worked. Aung San Suu Kyi proved as impressive as I wanted her to be. Poised, articulate, surprisingly funny. I had honed my questions to 20 and structured them with the most important questions first because I had heard that her house was bugged and we could be interrupted at any time. When I told her that I only had 20 questions, she laughed and said, 20 questions? It sounds like a quiz show. One of those questions was about an incident that had happened just a few weeks before when the generals tried to disrupt one of her speeches by bringing in fire trucks that sprayed the crowd with fire hoses. I asked her if she'd been scared. Scared, she said. If that's their goal, they haven't succeeded. Her message was unflinching. She called for an end to the violence and the beginning of peace talks. She called for the release of all political prisoners and the return of free elections. But more than anything, she said, after so many years of military repression and violence, her country needed to remember its ancient Buddhist spiritual values: nonviolence, forgiveness, compassion for the poor, and right living. By the time I left, I understood why, for so many, Aung San Suu Kyi is considered the Gandhi of their time. Just a few weeks after I met with her, Aung San Suu Kyi risked going back out again. Everywhere she went across the country, she drew crowds by the thousands and thousands and thousands. The generals grew alarmed at the support that she was attracting and tried to kill her again. This time, they sent convoys of assailants to attack her group on the road. More than 200 of Suu Kyi's party members were beaten to death with iron rods and bamboo sticks. Many of them died as they linked arms around her car to protect her. Aung San Suu Kyi was injured, captured, and placed under even more intense house arrest. As it turned out, I was the last person who was able to interview her. She was totally incommunicado. As conditions worsened in the country, monks took to the streets to protest. Again, the military showed no mercy. Many of the unarmed monks were beaten, killed, or imprisoned. The international community was rallied by people like Bishop Tutu, the Dalai Lama, the rock star Bono, and First Lady Laura Bush. They ratcheted up the pressure for Aung San Suu Kyi's release, and it helped. The good news is that in November 2010, the military government, worn down by international sanctions and pressure, released Aung San Suu Kyi. And she went right back out again, ran for parliament to fill a vacancy, and won in a landslide. She was finally able to leave the country to give her Nobel Prize acceptance speech and to see her sons and to meet the people who had worked so hard for her release over the years. Today, Burma is still dominated by the military, but they have released most of the political prisoners, allowed independent newspapers to operate, and have opened the economy. Today, when you visit Rangoon, instead of a soldier on every corner, there are businessmen in every hotel trying to make deals. Companies like GE, Ford, Coca-Cola, and MasterCard are all banking that Burma will be the new Gold Coast of Asia. Starbucks says they're on their way. But the bad news is that violence has not stopped against ethnic people, Christians, and Muslims. Corruption is rampant. Drug production has gone up. 75% of the people still lack electricity. The problem is that real change can't come to Burma so long as the military controls all the top posts and the majority of parliament. But in 2015, there will be full parliamentary elections, and that could be a hinge moment for Burma, an inflection point. All the seats in the presidency will be up for grabs. The question of the hour is, will the military allow changes to the Constitution, which they imposed, to allow for broader representation? For example, Aung San Suu Kyi has said she would like to serve as president, but until the Constitution is reformed, she can't run, and former generals can. Now, as much as ever before, the international community, the business community, all the people of the planet Earth need to keep up the pressure for true reform in Burma. A true transition from military rule would send a powerful message to people who are struggling for freedom around the world. For the U.S., it would provide strategic balance to China's position in the region. For all of us, it would be a demonstration of what the Nobel Committee called the power of good. You know, the truth is, there is enough misery in the world caused by human beings. We need more leaders like Aung San Suu Kyi in the spotlight to remind us of the ancient values of duty and honor, to mobilize the best in us. In 2015, Aung San Suu Kyi will be 70 years old. You know, when we talk about 70, we talk about retiring. But the lady is not retiring. She is going back out. Aung San Suu Kyi will not let go until her country sees better days, and neither should we. Thank you very much.
有连着的手里呀嘛把为嘛嘞，为啥卡达人嘛表嘞？有了奈米卡开来，人那个面大的呀嘞，有连着的手里呀嘛把为嘛嘞，为啥卡达人嘛表嘞？有了奈米卡开来，人那个的啥的呀嘞，为啥啦？